The limestone walls held secrets for 102 years. Deep beneath Widow's Ridge in eastern Kentucky, where coal veins thread through rock like dark arteries, a 12-year-old girl had carved her final words into stone with a rusted mining nail. Day 43. The water tastes funny now. I hear them calling, but they can't hear me back. By the time spelunkers found Josie Harlan's underground prison in 2014, her handwriting had outlasted 5 generations of her family. The diary entries began hopeful, marking days with careful scratches on limestone. They ended in desperation, the letters growing wild and deep, gouged by fingernails when the nail broke. Between those first hopeful marks and the last frantic scrawls lay a truth that would rewrite everything the people of Hazard County thought they knew about the autumn Josie vanished, and everything they believed about the mine that killed their fathers and grandfathers long before Black Lung ever could. October winds carried the smell of wood smoke and dying leaves through the hollows of eastern Kentucky in 1912. Coal dust settled on everything like gritty snow: porch railings, wash hanging on lines, the blonde hair of 12-year-old Josie Harlan as she walked the ridge trail above Widow's Point. The Consolidated Mining Company owned everything that mattered in Hazard County: the mines, the company store, the houses where miners lived, and even the doctor who treated them when rockfalls crushed their bones or gas explosions seared their lungs. Dr. Benjamin Harlan served as company physician, a position that paid well but demanded silence about what he found in the miners' bodies when they came to him dying. His daughter Josie had inherited his careful eyes and steady hands, along with his dangerous habit of asking questions that made powerful men uncomfortable. The mining trail she followed that October morning had been abandoned since the previous spring, when a methane explosion killed 14 men in Tunnel 7. Company officials blamed faulty equipment. Dr. Harlan's autopsy reports, locked in his desk drawer, told a different story about safety violations and ignored warnings. Josie had seen her father writing those reports late at night, his hand shaking as he documented what he could not say aloud. She carried a canvas bag containing her father's lunch and a thermos of coffee, walking the 2 miles to the active mine where he treated injured workers. The trail wound through stands of maple and oak, their leaves burnished copper and gold in the morning light. At the highest point of the ridge, where the path curved around a limestone outcrop, Josie could see the entire valley spread below her, the river threading silver between the hills, the company town with its neat rows of identical houses, and the dark mouth of the mine where her father spent his days patching up broken men. What she could not see was the hidden opening in the rock face behind her, concealed by a century of root growth and fallen stone. The cave system beneath Widow's Ridge had been mapped by company geologists in 1891, then sealed and forgotten when the mineral surveys proved disappointing. But seals fail, and limestone shifts, and on that October morning in 1912, a girl's curiosity about strange sounds echoing from behind the stones would open a door that could not be closed again. The first thing Josie heard was water dripping in a rhythm that did not match the October rain. She stopped on the trail, tilting her head toward the limestone cliff that rose like a gray wall beside the path. The sound seemed to come from inside the rock itself, a hollow echo that suggested vast spaces hidden beyond the visible stone. Her father had taught her to observe carefully, to notice details that others missed. The ivy covering the rock face grew in an unnatural pattern, thick on the left side, but sparse on the right, as if something interfered with its growth. When she pushed aside the vines, her fingers found not solid rock, but empty space, a gap wide enough for a child to squeeze through, hidden behind decades of plant growth and weathering. The opening exhaled cool air that smelled of deep earth and something else, something metallic that reminded her of the taste of blood. Josie had been in caves before. Her father had shown her the small caverns near their house where they collected limestone water for his medical preparations. But this felt different. The darkness beyond the opening seemed to swallow sound, creating a silence so complete it made her ears ring. She called out softly, and her voice came back changed, stretched and multiplied by unseen chambers. The echo suggested a space much larger than the small caves she knew, a hidden world beneath the familiar ridge where she had walked 100 times before. Her father's lunch could wait. The workers at the mine would not miss their doctor for an hour, and Josie had inherited more than his careful observation. She had inherited his need to understand what others preferred to leave hidden. She left her canvas bag beside the trail, marking the spot with a cairn of white stones so she could find it again. Then she squeezed through the opening, feeling the cool touch of limestone against her shoulders as she slipped from the October morning into a darkness that had waited decades for her arrival. The passage opened almost immediately into a larger chamber, and Josie fumbled for the matches she always carried in her pocket. The brief flame revealed smooth walls carved by centuries of flowing water, and something else that made her breath catch, marks on the stone that looked deliberate, made by human hands. The matchlight danced across symbols scratched into the limestone, letters and numbers, some fresh enough to catch the flame's reflection, others worn nearly smooth by time and moisture. Josie moved deeper into the cave, lighting match after match, following the marks like breadcrumbs through a fairy tale that had already gone wrong. The scratches told stories in fragments, initials paired with dates going back decades. JM 1887. Remember Mary. Tunnel 3 collapse wasn't accident. Some messages were carved with tools, clean lines that bit deep into the stone. Others looked clawed by fingernails, desperate gouges that spoke of fear and pain and running out of time. Near what appeared to be the chamber's far wall, the marks grew more numerous and more frantic. Josie struck another match and leaned close, squinting to read words that seemed written in a dialect she did not recognize. Then she realized why the language seemed strange. It was not just the mountain speech she had grown up hearing, but the older words that came before English claimed these hills. Cherokee words mixed with Scots-Irish, creating a patois that belonged to people who had lived in these mountains when they were still hiding from the outside world. One message, carved deep enough to hold shadow even in the matchlight, stopped her cold. Company knows about the chambers. They come for anyone who finds the deep places. If you read this, run. The match burned down to her fingers, and darkness swallowed the cave again. In the moments before she could strike another light, Josie heard something that made her stomach clench with fear. Voices, distant and echoing, coming from somewhere deeper in the cave system. Male voices speaking in urgent whispers that carried through the stone corridors like wind through the hollows above. She held her breath, listening to words she could not quite make out but understood in her bones. These were not the voices of other curious children who had found their way into the forbidden cave. These were adult voices, voices with authority and purpose, voices that belonged to men who had been in these chambers before and knew their way through the darkness. The matchbox slipped from her trembling fingers, and the sound of it hitting stone seemed to echo through the cave like a gunshot. The whispered conversation stopped, replaced by a silence more terrible than any noise could have been. What Josie could not know, crouched in the darkness with her back pressed against the limestone wall, was that the Consolidated Mining Company had never forgotten about the caves beneath Widow's Ridge. The geological surveys from 1891 had revealed more than disappointing mineral deposits. They had discovered something far more valuable than coal or copper, something that required absolute secrecy and the cooperation of very specific men. The cave system stretched for miles beneath the county, connecting to other openings scattered throughout the mountains. Some emerged near abandoned homesteads, where families had died from fever or violence. Others opened into mine shafts, where accidents happened with suspicious frequency. The company had spent 20 years mapping every passage and cataloging every entrance, turning the underground network into something that served purposes never recorded in any official document. Dr. Harlan had begun to suspect the truth 6 months before his daughter disappeared. Too many miners came to him with injuries that did not match their stories. Too many families reported missing relatives who had last been seen near places where the cave system offered hidden access. Too many company officials asked careful questions about which of his patients talked too much about what they had seen underground. The doctor's growing suspicions had not gone unnoticed. Company security, headed by a man named Pike who had learned his trade in the Kentucky Coal Wars, maintained detailed files on every employee who might pose a risk to their underground operations. Dr. Harlan's file had grown thick with reports from informants who attended his church, shopped at his store, and even shared his dinner table. Pike's men used the caves for many purposes. Some were business transactions that required privacy from federal agents investigating labor violations. Others involved the disappearance of union organizers or miners who had seen too much and talked too often. The limestone chambers made excellent prisons for men who needed time to reconsider their positions, and the remote entrances ensured that even successful escapes led only to wilderness where a man could die of exposure long before reaching help. When young Josie Harlan squeezed through the hidden entrance that October morning, she had stumbled into the middle of one such business meeting, and the voices she heard belonged to men who could not afford witnesses. The footsteps approached through passages Josie could not see, guided by lamplight that grew stronger with each echo off the limestone walls. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, feeling blindly for any crack or crevice that might offer concealment. Her fingers found only smooth stone, polished by centuries of flowing water into surfaces that offered no hiding place for a frightened child. The voices grew clearer as the men drew near. She recognized one speaker immediately, Tom Pike, the company's security chief, whose gravelly tone had terrified miners and their families for over a decade. Pike's laugh was unmistakable, a sound like grinding coal that seemed to scrape against the cave walls themselves. "Problem is," Pike was saying, his voice carrying easily through the stone corridors, "these mountain people don't understand the value of keeping quiet. They think they can bargain with information, use what they know to get better treatment or more pay." Another voice responded, younger and more refined, speaking with the careful diction of someone educated back east. "The board is becoming concerned about exposure. Too many federal investigators asking questions about our labor practices. We need a more permanent solution to the security problem." Josie pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle her breathing. She had heard these men speaking before, in her father's office when they came to discuss medical matters that never seemed to involve actual medicine. The younger voice belonged to James Caldwell, the company's regional director, a man who wore expensive suits and spoke about miners as if they were machinery that occasionally broke down. "The caves serve their purpose," Pike replied, "but we may need to expand our operations. There are 3 more union organizers arriving from Charleston next week, and the federal mine inspector is planning another visit in November. We'll need space for them while we adjust their perspectives." The lamplight rounded the corner, and Josie caught her first glimpse of the men who owned the darkness beneath Widow's Ridge. Pike moved with the confident stride of someone who knew these passages intimately, his lantern held high to illuminate the path ahead. Behind him walked Caldwell, and two other men Josie did not recognize, all dressed in the dark clothes that marked them as company officials. They were heading directly toward the chamber where she hid, and there was nowhere left to run. The lamp beam swept across the limestone walls like a searching finger, probing every shadow and crevice. Josie pressed herself into the deepest corner of the chamber, making herself as small as possible behind a formation of flowstone that had taken centuries to build. The mineral deposits created a curtain of frozen waterfalls, translucent sheets of calcium carbonate that might conceal a child if she stayed perfectly still. Pike's voice echoed from just beyond the chamber entrance. "This is where we'll set up the holding area. 3 chambers connected by that narrow passage, water source from the underground stream, and only one way in or out that we can control." The beam of light played across the chamber ceiling, revealing formations that looked like cathedral arches carved by patient water. Josie could see the men's shadows dancing on the limestone walls, distorted by the uneven light into shapes that seemed larger than human. She pressed her face against the cold stone and prayed to whatever God protected foolish children who stumbled into places they did not belong. "The beauty of this system," Caldwell's educated voice continued, "is that it's completely isolated from any public access. Even if someone manages to escape, they'll be miles from the nearest town, underground, in complete darkness. The psychological effect is quite effective at encouraging cooperation." One of the unknown men spoke up, his accent marking him as someone from outside the mountains. "What about the families? Won't they report missing persons to the sheriff?" Pike's laugh scraped against the stone walls. "Sheriff Morrison has been very understanding about people who simply disappear. Amazing how many union organizers decide to move on to greener pastures without saying goodbye. And if families ask too many questions, well, accidents happen in coal country. Cave-ins, gas explosions, falls down mine shafts. Dangerous work, mining coal." The lamplight swung toward Josie's hiding place, and she held her breath as the beam passed inches from her face. Through the translucent flowstone, she could see Pike's weathered features, his eyes scanning the chamber with the methodical attention of a man who had learned to notice every detail. He paused, frowning, and took a step in her direction. "Thought I heard something earlier," he muttered. "Sound carries strange in these caves." Josie's heart hammered against her ribs so hard, she was certain the sound would echo through the chamber and give her away. She pressed herself deeper into the stone formation, feeling sharp edges of calcite pressing against her back through her dress. One wrong move, one shifted weight, one inadvertent sound, and the girl who had heard too much would become another problem for Pike's efficient underground operation. Dr. Benjamin Harlan had begun to suspect his daughter was missing long before he found her canvas bag beside the abandoned trail. Josie was never late returning from her morning walks, and she had never left his lunch forgotten on the ridge, while miners waited at the company medical station with injuries that needed tending. When he found the bag beside the cairn of white stones, the doctor's medical training took over. He examined the scene with the same methodical attention he brought to autopsy work, noting every detail that might explain his daughter's disappearance. The stones had been placed deliberately, marking a location rather than falling naturally. The ground near the limestone cliff showed signs of disturbance: broken twigs, scuffed earth, ivy pulled away from the rock face in a pattern that suggested someone had been exploring. Dr. Harlan had lived in these mountains long enough to know about the old cave systems, and he had treated enough miners to understand that the company's official maps did not show every tunnel or chamber beneath the county. Too many workers came to him with stories about passages that led to places not mentioned in safety briefings. Too many accidents happened near areas where company geologists claimed no caves existed. The hidden entrance behind the ivy confirmed his worst fears. The gap was barely wide enough for an adult man, but easily passable for a curious 12-year-old girl. Cool air flowed from the opening, carrying the smell of deep water and something else, something chemical that reminded him of the preservatives he used in his medical practice. He called for his daughter, shouting her name into the darkness until his voice grew hoarse. The echoes that came back suggested vast spaces beyond the visible rock, chambers large enough to swallow a child's voice and return only silence. Dr. Harlan had matches in his medical bag, but no rope or lantern, nothing that would allow him to safely explore the passage where his daughter had vanished. By the time he returned to town for help, carrying Josie's canvas bag like evidence from a crime scene, rumors were already spreading through the company housing. The doctor's daughter had gone missing near the old mine trail. Sheriff Morrison organized search parties, but they focused on the surface trails and familiar caves, places where an ordinary lost child might reasonably be found. No one mentioned the sealed cave system beneath Widow's Ridge, and Dr. Harlan began to understand that his daughter had stumbled into something far more dangerous than natural underground spaces. He also began to understand that finding her would require knowledge the company preferred to keep buried as deep as the coal they mined. Sheriff Dale Morrison had been keeping company secrets for so long that he had almost convinced himself they were his own. The monthly payments from Consolidated Mining came disguised as consulting fees for law enforcement services. But everyone in Hazard County understood the real arrangement. Morrison investigated crimes that the company wanted investigated and ignored problems that might interfere with business operations. When Dr. Harlan reported his daughter missing, Morrison followed the expected procedures. He organized search parties, questioned potential witnesses, and filed the appropriate paperwork with state authorities. But he also made certain that the searches avoided specific areas where curious citizens might discover things better left hidden. The abandoned mine trail where Josie had disappeared fell squarely within the prohibited zone. Morrison told the search parties that the area was too dangerous for civilians, that old mine shafts and unstable ground made it unsuitable for volunteers. He assigned the trail search to company security personnel, men who reported directly to Tom Pike, and understood which discoveries should be shared with families and which should remain confidential. Dr. Harlan pressed the sheriff for more aggressive search efforts, demanding access to the limestone caves that honeycombed the ridge where his daughter had vanished. Morrison deflected these requests with bureaucratic efficiency, citing safety concerns and insurance liability. The company would not permit civilian searchers in areas where mining operations might be compromised. What Morrison did not tell the frantic father was that Pike's men had already found evidence of Josie's presence in the forbidden cave system. A hair ribbon caught on limestone, small footprints in the clay deposits near an underground stream, and most damning of all, scratch marks on the chamber walls where someone had tried to claw their way through solid rock. The sheriff also did not mention the company's decision about how to handle the problem of a missing child who had seen too much and heard too much in places where children should never have been able to venture. Some secrets were too valuable to risk on a 12-year-old girl's. Discretion and some disappearances served purposes beyond simple concealment of evidence. Morrison filed his final report on the Harlan case after 3 weeks of increasingly desperate searches. The official conclusion stated that young Josie had most likely fallen into one of the many abandoned mine shafts that dotted the county. and that recovery of remains would be extremely difficult given the hazardous terrain and unstable ground conditions. The case was closed, filed away with other unsolved disappearances that had occurred near company property, and life in Hazard County continued according to the rhythms that consolidated mining preferred. What would you do if you were Dr. Harlan, watching the sheriff abandon the search for your daughter while knowing that powerful men were hiding the truth about her disappearance? Deep beneath Widow's Ridge, Josie Harlan had been carving marks into limestone for 6 weeks when she realized that the men who owned the darkness above were never coming back for her. The chamber where she had hidden during that first terrifying encounter had become her prison when a rockfall sealed the passage back to the entrance. Whether by accident or design, she would never know. The cave system stretched far beyond the chambers where Pike conducted his underground business, connecting to water sources and smaller openings that provided just enough air circulation to sustain life. Josie had found one such opening on her 3rd day of exploration, a crack in the ceiling that allowed thin streams of daylight to penetrate the perpetual darkness below. She had also discovered that previous prisoners had left supplies hidden in various chambers: tin cans of preserved food, candles wrapped in oilcloth, even crude tools fashioned from broken mining equipment. The cache suggested a systematic operation, a place where people were kept for extended periods and expected to survive on minimal resources. With a rusted mining nail found in one of the supply chambers, Josie began carving her diary into the limestone walls. Day 1. Found the cave by accident. Men talking about holding people here. Can't find way back to entrance. Day 7. Rain coming through ceiling crack. Water tastes like metal but safe to drink. Found more scratches from other people who were kept here. The messages carved by earlier prisoners told fragments of stories that made Josie understand the full scope of what she had discovered. Union organizers who had vanished after speaking too publicly about working conditions. Miners who had tried to report safety violations to federal inspectors. Families who had asked too many questions about company operations. Some of the carved messages included names and dates going back years. Henry Jackson, August 1909, told them about the gas pocket in Tunnel 5. Mary Cassidy, November 1910, saw them dumping bodies in the old shaft. Day 15, getting weaker. Found bones in the deep chamber, old bones. These men have been using caves for a long time. Day 23. Heard voices from above yesterday. Shouted until throat raw but don't think they heard. Or didn't want to hear. The carved diary revealed a pattern that would have terrified even the adult men who had disappeared into Pike's underground operations. The company did not just eliminate problems. They systematically erased people who threatened their secrets, using the cave system as both prison and tomb for anyone who learned too much about their methods. Dr. Benjamin Harlan's medical practice had become a front for his real work, documenting every suspicious death, injury, and disappearance connected to consolidated mining. 6 months after his daughter vanished, he had assembled enough evidence to expose the company's systematic elimination of troublesome employees, if he could find someone willing to listen who was not already in Pike's pocket. His examination of mining accident victims had revealed patterns that no honest physician could ignore. Injuries that did not match official explanations. Bodies recovered from mine shafts that showed signs of violence before the supposed falls. Most damning of all, tissue samples that contained traces of substances never found naturally in coal mine environments. The doctor had hidden his evidence in the one place where company men never ventured. The county cemetery's mausoleum, where wealthy families entombed their dead above ground in elaborate stone structures. Dr. Harlan maintained the cemetery's medical records, documenting cause of death for burial permits, and no one questioned his frequent visits to update files stored in the mausoleum's record room. December 13th, 1912. Report on examination of James Mackenzie, age 34, recovered from tunnel collapse in Section 7. Official cause of death, listed as crushing injuries consistent with cave-in. Actual findings: blunt force trauma to skull inconsistent with falling rock. Defensive wounds on hands and forearms suggest struggle before death. Limestone particles in fingernails do not match coal mine geology. The hidden reports documented dozens of cases where miners had died under suspicious circumstances after reporting safety violations or attempting to contact federal inspectors. The pattern was clear enough to convict company officials of multiple murders, if Dr. Harlan could find someone with authority to act on his evidence. His opportunity came when a federal mine safety inspector named Robert Chen arrived in Hazard County to investigate reports of systematic safety violations. Chen was not connected to local law enforcement or company payroll, making him the first honest official Dr. Harlan had encountered since his daughter's disappearance. The meeting took place in the cemetery mausoleum at midnight on a December night when snow muffled sound and provided cover for clandestine activity. Dr. Harlan handed over 6 months of hidden documentation, along with a detailed map of the cave system beneath Widow's Ridge, where he believed his daughter and other disappeared persons were being held. "This evidence will bring federal marshals into the county within a week," Chen promised, studying the medical reports by lamplight. "If your daughter is alive, we'll find her. If she's not, we'll make certain the men responsible face justice." But Dr. Harlan had underestimated the reach of company informants, and Chen had underestimated the determination of men who had killed dozens of people to protect their secrets. Robert Chen's body was discovered in his hotel room the morning after his midnight meeting with Dr. Harlan. Sheriff Morrison ruled the death a heart attack, citing the stress of investigative work and the inspector's known history of cardiac problems. The Federal Mine Safety Office accepted the explanation and suspended their investigation pending assignment of a replacement inspector. Dr. Harlan found Chen's room had been thoroughly searched, with all documents and evidence carefully removed. The inspector's notes and official files were missing, along with any record of his planned investigation into company operations. Even his personal belongings had been sorted through with professional thoroughness. Tom Pike made no attempt to hide his satisfaction when he visited Dr. Harlan's office the following afternoon. "Terrible tragedy about Inspector Chen," Pike said, settling into the chair where so many miners had sat while the doctor examined their injuries. "Heart problems can be unpredictable, especially in men who experience sudden stress." The security chief's meaning was unmistakable, but he delivered the threat with the casual tone of a man discussing weather conditions. Federal investigators rarely understand the complexities of mountain life. They ask questions without appreciating the delicate balance that keeps communities like ours functioning smoothly. Dr. Harlan continued preparing medical supplies, refusing to meet Pike's eyes while understanding exactly what the conversation was really about. His daughter had been missing for 7 months, and now the only honest federal official who might have helped find her was dead. The evidence he had spent months collecting was gone, and the men responsible for multiple murders were making it clear that his own continued survival depended on silence. "I trust you'll be more circumspect in your interactions with any future federal visitors," Pike continued, examining his fingernails with affected boredom. "Families in this county depend on the mining company for their livelihoods. It would be unfortunate if misunderstandings about our operations led to economic disruption." The threat extended beyond Dr. Harlan himself to every patient he treated, every family that depended on his medical services. Pike had not achieved his position by making empty threats, and everyone in Hazard County understood that crossing company security meant risking consequences that extended to innocent relatives and neighbors. After Pike left, Dr. Harlan sat alone in his office, staring at the medical certificates that documented his years of service to the mining community. He had become a doctor to save lives, but his attempts to expose the truth about his daughter's disappearance had already cost one man his life and threatened many others. The choice facing him was brutally simple: abandon hope of finding Josie and allow the company to continue using murder as a business tool, or continue fighting and watch more innocent people die for his obsession with justice. Day 71. Water stopped dripping from ceiling crack 3 days ago. Stream tastes worse, like metal and something else I can't name. Found more bones in connecting chamber. Some look small, like children. Think they've been using caves for a long time to make people disappear. Josie's final diary entries, carved deep into the limestone with fingernails after the rusted nail broke, revealed the full scope of her discovery. The cave system beneath Widow's Ridge was not just a temporary holding facility. It was a systematic disposal operation where the company eliminated anyone who threatened their profitable arrangement with federal corruption. Her exploration of the deeper chambers had uncovered evidence spanning decades. Children's clothing preserved in the dry limestone environment. Personal effects from missing miners and their families. Most chilling of all, a chamber filled with human remains arranged with careful organization, suggesting that the disposal of inconvenient people was a regular and methodical business practice. Day 78. Can hear machinery above sometimes, like they're digging or moving heavy things. Voices too, but too far away to understand. Tried following sound, but passages get narrower and air gets bad. Think they might be expanding the operation. The carved messages told the story of a child's growing understanding of her hopeless situation. Josie had realized that her father would be searching for her, but she had also figured out that the men who controlled the search would never allow him to find the places where missing people were actually taken. Day 85. Getting hard to see even with candle. Eyes hurt all the time now. Found way to chamber where water comes in, but opening too small to climb through. If someone finds this someday, tell my father I tried to come home. Tell him what they do to people in the dark places under the mountain. The final entries showed handwriting that grew increasingly erratic, carved by a dying child who used her remaining strength to leave testimony that might someday expose the truth about Consolidated Mining's systematic elimination of threats to their operation. Day 91. Can't feel hands anymore. Water tastes like poison now, but nothing else to drink. They poisoned the stream to make sure no one survives long enough to cause trouble. Smart. Cruel, but smart. I hope someone finds this before they move all the bones. The last message, gouged into stone with fingernails worn to bleeding stubs, contained just 5 words that would haunt investigators more than a century later. The company owns the darkness. Dr. Benjamin Harlan's decision came to him on a February morning in 1913, while he was treating a miner whose injuries told yet another story that contradicted company explanations. Thomas Whitman had supposedly been hurt in a tunnel collapse, but the pattern of his wounds suggested he had been beaten with mining tools before being buried in loose coal to simulate an accident. As Dr. Harlan cleaned and bandaged the wounds, Whitman whispered the truth about what had really happened. I seen them taking bodies out of the deep shaft, Doc. Bodies that weren't killed in no cave-in. Pike's men got a whole operation down there, making people disappear who asked too many questions. The miner's testimony confirmed what the doctor had suspected for months. His daughter had stumbled into something far larger than a single disappearance, and the federal investigation that might have exposed the truth had died with Inspector Chen. No outside authority was coming to help, and local law enforcement was completely compromised by company corruption. That night, Dr. Harlan made his final entries in the hidden medical records he had been maintaining since Josie's disappearance. The documentation now filled 3 leather journals, detailing every suspicious death and injury he had treated over the past year. The pattern was unmistakable. Consolidated Mining was systematically murdering anyone who threatened their operation, using the cave system beneath Widow's Ridge as both prison and disposal site. His plan was simple and desperate. If he could not bring federal authorities to Hazard County, he would bring Hazard County's secrets to federal authorities. The journey to the state capital would take 3 days by train, assuming company agents did not intercept him before he reached Louisville. Once there, he could present his evidence to federal prosecutors who were beyond Pike's reach and influence. Dr. Harlan spent the week preparing for his departure, making arrangements for another physician to cover his medical practice and storing additional copies of his evidence in hidden locations around the county. He wrote detailed instructions for finding the cave entrances where missing people were being held, including a hand-drawn map based on his conversations with surviving miners who had glimpsed the underground operations. The night before his planned departure, he visited the cemetery mausoleum one final time to retrieve his hidden documentation. What he found waiting for him in the record room would determine not just his own fate, but the eventual discovery of his daughter's final testimony, carved into limestone walls beneath Widow's Ridge. Tom Pike and 3 company men were sitting calmly among the funeral records, having waited patiently for the doctor to make his inevitable move. The official record shows that Dr. Benjamin Harlan died in a train accident while traveling to Louisville on business related to his medical practice. The locomotive derailed on a curved section of track near Frankfort, killing all 12 passengers in what investigators ruled a mechanical failure caused by inadequate maintenance of the rails. Pike's efficiency extended to the cleanup of loose ends. Dr. Harlan's replacement, a company physician named Miller, discovered that most of the previous doctor's medical records had been damaged in a basement flood that conveniently occurred the week after the fatal train accident. Any documentation that might have raised questions about suspicious deaths or injuries was destroyed, leaving only routine treatment records that revealed nothing about systematic violence. The cave system beneath Widow's Ridge was sealed with explosives, officially to prevent unauthorized access to dangerous underground spaces. Company statements cited liability concerns and the need to protect public safety from unstable limestone formations. The sealed entrances were marked with warning signs that remained in place for decades, even after Consolidated Mining ceased operations in the county. Sheriff Morrison continued his selective law enforcement until his retirement in 1938, when he was succeeded by his son, who maintained the same understanding about which crimes deserved investigation and which were better left undisturbed. The Morrison family served as sheriffs in Hazard County for over 60 years, creating a dynasty of official blindness that protected company secrets long after the mines closed. The last official mention of Josie Harlan appeared in county records from 1952, when her missing person case was transferred to inactive status and filed in the courthouse basement. By then, everyone who remembered the 12-year-old girl's disappearance was dead or had learned the value of keeping silent about things that happened in the mountains, when powerful men preferred darkness to justice. Consolidated Mining sold their Kentucky holdings in 1967 after coal reserves were exhausted and federal safety regulations made their traditional methods of operation too expensive to maintain. The new owners were a timber company that had no interest in underground operations or hidden cave systems. The company's departure did not erase the legacy of their systematic violence. Families continued to whisper stories about relatives who had vanished during the mining years, but the knowledge remained fragmented and hidden, passed down in careful conversations that never mentioned specific names or locations. The truth had been buried as deep as the coal itself. For 102 years, the limestone caves beneath Widow's Ridge held their secrets undisturbed, until a group of recreational, spelunkers with modern equipment and no knowledge of local history decided to explore the forbidden underground passages that had been sealed since their grandparents' generation. The spelunkers who found Josie Harlan's carved diary in 2014 had been drawn to Widow's Ridge by online forums that discussed unusual geological formations in eastern Kentucky. Modern mapping technology had revealed cave systems that matched no official surveys, suggesting hidden chambers that might contain rare formations or archaeological artifacts. When they finally broke through the collapsed entrance that had sealed the caves for over a century, they expected to find mineral deposits or perhaps evidence of Native American occupation. Instead, they discovered a child's testimony carved into stone, growing increasingly desperate as the entries progressed from hope to understanding to despair. The discovery triggered federal investigation that finally exposed the scope of Consolidated Mining's systematic elimination of troublesome employees and their families. Ground-penetrating radar revealed multiple burial sites throughout the cave system, containing the remains of dozens of people who had disappeared during the company's decades of operation in Hazard County. DNA analysis confirmed that one set of remains belonged to Josie Harlan, found in the deep chamber where she had carved her final message into limestone, with fingernails worn to bleeding bone. Her father's missing medical records were discovered in a waterproof case hidden behind loose stones, documenting evidence that would have exposed the murders a century earlier if federal investigators had lived long enough to receive it. The case prompted congressional hearings on corporate violence and federal corruption in the early 20th century mining industry, but by then, everyone responsible for the murders was long dead. Justice had been delayed so long that it had effectively been denied, leaving only academic interest in atrocities that no longer carried legal consequences. Local residents were divided about the discovery. Some families finally learned what had happened to relatives who had vanished during the mining years, but others preferred the comfort of mystery to the certainty of terrible truth about their community's buried history. The cave system was closed again after the investigation concluded, this time with metal gates and federal protection as a historical site. But visitors to Widow's Ridge still report hearing voices echoing from deep underground, and some claim the sound carries the voices of children calling for help that will never come. Josie Harlan's story endures in the mountains where she died, whispered among people who understand that power and money can bury almost any truth. But limestone holds memory longer than human institutions protect justice. Subscribe if you want the next deep dive.